Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. And today's episode is Merlin, Season 3, Episode 3, Gwaine. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happens in the episode. So the episode begins with Arthur and Merlin riding their horses, having presumably been hunting, though we don't see any actual game caught. And Arthur insists on going to a local tavern and pretending to be a peasant while he is there. When they arrive, the tavern owner hits on Merlin, which surprises Arthur, who expected it to be himself who got hit on, and then some local thugs come into the bar or the tavern and extort money from the tavern owner, Mary, who gives them what she has, but then it's not enough for them, so they then attack her, and that's when Arthur stands up and interferes. And he at first thinks that this thug is alone, but then once he challenges him, a bunch of other thugs come in from outside. So Arthur and Merlin then start a bar fight, which Gwaine joins in on because he saw that they had the slimmer odds, and they end up winning, which leaves the thug in the stocks as they leave. He reveals he is Prince Arthur, and should the thug bother them again, he'll send soldiers, so send to Camelot for help. And then he and Merlin head back home with an injured Gwaine, who was wounded in the leg in the bar fight. They, of course, get him back to Camelot. He takes up Merlin's room and is healed, and is unfortunately upset to find himself in the castle in Camelot and that Arthur was a noble, as despite his father having been a knight himself, so he is a noble, he does not like the nobility, believing that it's the actions of a person that makes them noble, not their blood, because his father, when his father passed, was treated very terribly by the liege lord and obviously was therefore not something that he wanted to follow his footsteps into. They then, as they're there, the thugs decide to go to a magic user, purchase swords that are sorcelled to look dull but are actually sharp, and then get crystals that can steal the identity of whoever's blood is put into them. So they steal the identities of a couple of knights who are on the way to Camelot, where there's conveniently a melee about to happen. And Merlin at first decides to try to, after discovering the swords aren't blunt, tries to steal one of the swords in order to take it back to have proof when he confronts Uther about these knights. However, before he can do that, they attack him because they wake up and he was silly enough to try to steal the sword while they were in the room. And then Gwaine arrives to help him once Gaius and him figure out that Merlin hasn't come back for a while. And he then is, basically because Uther doesn't know that he's a noble as well, his word is not taken as clearly he's not, or he's pretending not to be noble, so he takes the thug's word over Gwaine because they are disguised as nobles. And Gwaine is banished thanks to Arthur stepping in to avoid him being executed by saying that Gwaine saved his life, and so therefore the lesser sentence. They then do have Gwaine leaving, and we think he left, but then during the melee it turns out that there is someone, in addition to Merlin's subtle magic tricks to, make sure the thugs stay away from Arthur with their actually sharp blades, another knight that happens to be helping Arthur in the fight, and after performing a specific trick move, Merlin realizes that it's Gwaine. Then at the end of the melee, we have Arthur and Gwaine as the last two standing, the other two thugs having been killed by their own sharpened swords. They're then taken off the field. Uther is furious that Gwaine, a commoner, not only infiltrated the merely after being banished, but also killed two knights. But then Gaius takes the crystals off their necks, reveals that they in fact were thugs from the bar. Arthur confirms that Gawain has saved his life twice, and so Uther once again banishes him, doubling down on the banishment, but does decide not to execute him. And so Gawain leaves. As he's leaving, Arthur says that he could be a knight, he is a noble, and Gawain says he could never serve a man like Uther, and Merlin talks about how, Uther's not always going to be king, there's still Arthur, and Gawain leaves the door open for the fact that he may return to serve Arthur, who's a better man, but for now at least he is heading off to Mercia, he says. And then he leaves Camelot. So now that we've been reminded about what happened in the episode, it's now time to rank the episode. And as always, we'll be ranking on our 2 ranking lists, the mostly objective ranking list, followed by the personal ranking list. So for our mostly objective rank values, we first have our single episode supporting character introductions, which are our 2 thugs, Dagger and Ebor, who take on the identity of 2 knights. And they're each worth 1 point, bringing us to 2 points. Then we have our multi-season supporting character introduction, which is Gawain. And all of the character building that happened within this episode for Gawain's introduction do all count as part of his introduction, and therefore he is only worth the 3 points, which brings us up to 5 points for the episode. And then we do have the negative, which is our negative messaging and behavior. And because it was the villains who were engaging in this negative messaging and behavior, I decided to lump it all into one because I do believe that villains are expected to have negative behaviors so that the heroes can then overcome them, and so that is expected behavior, but the sheer amount of negative behavior that occurred, I felt like I still had to take points anyways, even though a lot of times I do choose not to for villains because of the expectation that it is within their behavior. Expectations? But again, there was a lot. So obviously we have the basic violence of beating people up in the bar fighting, not great. We then, of course, have murder and theft when they murder the sorcerer that they get the dull blades and the crystals from, which does also equal theft because they didn't end up having to pay him because they killed him. So they got the things that they had ordered from him for free. So murder/theft. Then, of course, there was the identity theft of the knights that they killed via the crystals. We then have them framing Merlin for attacking them and Gawain for attacking them when really they were the ones who started it. But then, to be fair, Merlin was trying to steal their swords to let everyone know. But basically, they even wanted Gawain executed when all he did was defend Merlin, claiming otherwise. And then, of course, is the very fact that they are cheating in the melee because they are using swords that only look dull but are actually sharp. So all of that coming together, that's another -2 points. That leaves this episode as a 3 out of 10 episode on the mostly objective rank values. So our season 3 ranking so far on the mostly objective ranking, in first we have the Tears of Uther Pendragon, second Goblin's Gold, and Gawain falls into 3rd place so far. Meanwhile, on the personal ranking, I did like the bar scenes because I did think it was funny with the bickering between Arthur and Merlin, and of course the fact that Merlin was hit on and not Arthur by the tavern owner, and how Gawain immediately stepped in because it had the lower odds. I like that aspect of his character. I also liked the action scenes that we got as part of the melee. I also enjoyed the bonding moments between Merlin and Gawain. After the initial bar fight, he didn't really have much contact with Arthur other than Arthur defending him to Uther. But any of the other scenes we saw him in, he was having, conversations with Merlin, talking about his father, how he was treated by nobles, revealing to Merlin that he was a noble, so he could actually become a knight if he wanted to, but he refuses to say that to Uther because he obviously doesn't want them to know because of his distrust for Uther. There's a scene where Gawain goes to the tavern in town in Camelot, can't pay. Merlin decides Arthur will pay. Arthur says he's not going to pay and has Merlin and Gawain polish all of the shoes for the army in order to pay back the amount. But that's pretty much the positives of the episode. Some of the negatives, though, I mentioned this in Valiant as well, way back in season 1. But if you are a seedy character doing seedy business with other seedy characters, you just would think you'd have a little bit more care with your self-defense. Like, these thugs order from this sorcerer 2 dull blades and the 2 crystals to steal identities, and this sorcerer, as soon as he gets the money and gives over the items, completely lowers his defenses, turns his back, and gets stabbed in the back and dies. And it's like, again, if you're doing seedy business with seedy characters, have a little bit of self-defense. Have a spell that's going to protect you. Don't turn your back on them. Make sure they leave your store. Move your store around. Use the magic that you clearly have to enchant those crystals and those swords to maybe, I don't know, have some sort of self-defense warding or spells or something that you can not die via your customers. Because the other sorcerer in Valiant as well, he makes this magical shield that's designed to kill people, gives complete control over it to Valiant, and then Valiant uses it to kill him. In this case, he creates swords that are designed to look dull but actually be very sharp, gives them to the customer, and then immediately turns his back and gets stabbed. Like, I don't know, these seedy, I think there's a reason that Uther was so successful with the Purge, and I don't think it was just because he had an army. I think it's also because the sorcerers, especially the ones that sell things, seem to be incredibly stupid, to be honest. And I don't mean to be mean about it, but I mean, I think it is something that is mean. But it's just a duh moment. It's like, if you're doing seedy, if you're doing something known to be illegal, and your customers are criminals who have very little conscience, take precautions. And these people don't. And so they kind of get what's coming to them, but at the same time, it's also kind of, really, do they all have this little self-preservation instincts? I don't know. And then that bothered me. And then there was like this Gawain and Gwen flirting thing, which, much like Lancelot, well, actually, no, I didn't think they had any chemistry, to be honest. But overall, I felt the episode was average. There was some exciting moments, some funny moments, some frustrating moments. There was also like a scene where, because they were disguised as the nobles, Merlin had to help them, these thugs, and because they were upset with him for taking part in the bar fight, they made him move a trunk all over the room all the time. So, yeah, I think it was okay, but it wasn't great. And that's why it's a 5 out of 10, which is the lowest score so far in the season. So the personal ranking has Goblin's Gold in first, the Tears of Uther Pendragon in second, and then Gawain is in third with that 5 out of 10. Bringing us now to the series ranking so far, and on our mostly objective side, we had Season 2 in first place with 70.83%, Season 1 in second with 69.23%, and Season 3 so far has a score of 20 out of 110. Meanwhile, on the personal ranking, we had 85 out of 120 for 70.83% for Season 2. Season 1 scored 66.92%, and then Season 3 so far is at 22 out of 110. With that, we've now rewatched and ranked Merlin Season 3, Episode 3, Gawain. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.